Welcome to Imaginary Lands, the works of award-winning author and storyteller Bobby Pell. Today's selection, The Pearl of Great Price, is an original tale based on the Scottish legends of the Selkies, or the Seal people. With new dramatic twists and family mysteries, this riveting story draws you into each scene through vivid, lush imagery where dreams come true.
Strong, leathery fingers curl precisely around the paintbrush, creating delicate strokes. These hands, once used for high adventures on the open sea, now pursued more gentle journeys on palettes filled with midnight, magenta, rose, and sea green. Sean McBride had seen many nights in the Outer Hebrides, but none equaled the beauty before him now. The rocks, jutting upward in chaotic angles, formed a natural cove where he could sit and observe nature, a silent partner in the green world of Scotland. The waves reminded him of the sensuous curves of a woman, undulating in ever-changing contours. The moonlight and midnight clouds danced over the silent sea in a waltz of wonder. Then he heard it. A tune emanating from the waves themselves, familiar yet strange. There was a haunting quality that clung to each note as the voices blended in magnificent harmonies. He listened intently, peering around the boulders, completely mesmerized by the music. That was the first time he saw them, their bodies glistening in both the water and the moonlight, like silk lying upon satin. He watched as their hands splashed in the waves, marbled with foam. They lifted their arms in supplication to the Creator. At first, he thought it was only villagers out for a midnight swim, yet he sensed something different in their movements, fluid, as if one with the sea. A clouded memory crossed his mind when he saw what he dared not believe. There were the skins, piled one on top of the other, shining in the moonlight. Beads of water covered them, shimmering like precious jewels. The colors were easily discernible in the ivory glow of the evening. Sable browns as lush as molasses, grays so deep they were almost black, and gold, honey gold. Sean could barely believe his eyes. His grandfather had told him the legends of how the king of the sea took a landwalker, a human, for a wife. After many years of happy marriage, she died, and he mourned her death. He then took a new bride, the sea witch, to care for his children. Her jealousy of their beauty and straightness of limbs drove her to create a potion that transformed them into seals. Sean knew that during the full moon, these creatures were allowed to shed their seal skins and stand, as humans, from moonrise to sunrise. For those few hours they could delight in their humanity. Yet upon the rising of the sun, they were destined to become seals again and return to their watery home. Sean always wondered at the bittersweet smile that danced across his grandfather's face whenever he spoke of the seal people. The creatures were far enough from shore that Sean felt his presence would not disturb them. He went over to the pile and placed his hand on the uppermost skin, the golden one. Its weight reminded him of rain-soaked sweaters. He noticed eye holes in the headpiece. He ran his hand along the short, coarse fur, expecting it to be rough. Instead, it was smooth, like polished stones. He stood, unmoving, then sat, draping the skin over his crossed legs. He remained this way for hours, listening to the songs of the seal creatures. Soon they returned to the shore. Sean ran quickly and hid behind the boulder. His curiosity would not allow him to leave, not just yet. The sun kissed the horizon, then began its daily journey. Laughter rode the waves in as each one reached for their skin from the pile, placing it like a mantle around their shoulders. Sean quietly observed the transformation of the first man. He draped the skin over his back like a cape, pulling the headpiece over his dark hair. He then crouched forward, placing his palms upon the sand. His feet stretched out behind the bent knees, while the skin covered his toes. His arms began to change and thicken from slender limbs into the short fins of a seal. It was as if invisible fingers nimbly stitched the skin together. The skins now incorporated limbs and bone and flesh and became whole once more. Sean watched in amazement as this creature now edged his way back to the water. When he reached the water's edge, he dipped his nose into the water, allowing it to rush over his head. The transformation was now complete. Sean realized that the beach was filled with seals as each went through the same transition. They slowly moved into the water, heavy limbs on land, becoming graceful in the waves, until they were seen no longer. Sean shook himself as if to wake from a dream, yet this was real. He neglected to notice that one of these creatures still stood on the shore. She was a young woman with long flowing hair, shining with tints the colors of gold, honey, and wheat. She stood at the edge of the beach, frantically searching the sands. He could not imagine why she had not joined the others. Then he realized that her skin was missing. Now he remembered the weight in his hands, the golden seal coat, so natural in his grasp that he had forgotten it. Her eyes opened wide with fear. Her body, slender and white, glimmered between the strands which covered her nakedness. She faced her friends, looking to the waves for answers. She knew that without her skin, she would remain as a landwalker, never swimming the deep seas again. She stood, numbly, not knowing what to do. But Sean knew. He knew exactly what to do. He slowly moved towards her. She sensed a presence and turned to see a tall, swarthy man coming towards her, with blonde curls tipped with gray, whipping his cheeks. She barely noticed him as her eyes held the prize. In his outstretched hands lay her golden sealskin. Her fears evaporated like the foam on the shore, relief flooding her soul. "That's mine!" she cried, rushing to him. "I know," Sean replied gently, approaching her as he would a wild animal. "Here, take it." His speech and gestures let her know she could trust him. She reached for the sealskin, taking it from Sean. Their fingertips touched, ever so slightly, ever so lightly. Sean's senses were aroused by the coolness of her touch. She looked straight at him with her luminous green eyes. "I don't know how to repay you. One day, perhaps." Then she lifted the skin, placing it over her shoulders. "One day, perhaps." Then she hurried to the water's edge. She lowered her head into the surf. Sean watched her transformation, identical to the seals who had gone before her. She turned towards him now as a seal and focused on his steel blue eyes. Though her form had changed, the depth in her eyes was the same. It touched him to the very core of his being. Something stirred, fluttered like a moth to the flame deep in his soul. She closed her eyes, then facing the sea, melted into the water. She was gone. Sean wandered up and down the shoreline, unable to go home. Something about this seal woman, this Selkie, moved him like no human ever could. He had known women who were kind, saying they loved him, but he could never fully return their affections. He felt certain that there was a young boy in a foreign port with Sean's twinkle in his eye, or a young girl with Sean's ready laugh, yet no one claimed him. Now he lived on the Isle of Uist in the small whitewashed house where he'd been born. Sean replaced the thatched roofing after his parents passed away and moved back into the old homestead. Several women from the village tried to secure him as a husband, but Sean would have none of them. He did spend some time with the red-headed Maggie, the weaver, but her jealousy was intolerable. She never understood his life at sea, nor his fascination with it now. So Sean, being an only child, cherished his solitude. His life was simple, a retired sailor with no mistress but the sea. So he spent all of his time with her, painting her, loving her, with each stroke of the brush. At the next full moon, Sean sat behind the boulder on the beach, the wind whipping his tartan about his shoulders. He listened for that otherworldly sound of joy that he knew would rise from the throats of the seal people. And so he sat there in the quiet, shielded by the shadows. He watched them come to shore, dip their noses in the sand, then peel off the sealskin. They placed the skins in a pile once more, then hurried into the waves, laughing and giggling like children. He focused his attention on the young golden seal. As she pulled the sealskin from her body, her long hair swirled in magical arcs around her. Her head fell back, and her outstretched arms surrendered to the night as she breathed in the moonlight. She glanced toward the boulder, but not seeing Sean, plunged headlong into the water. It was a glorious sight. These creatures, who seemed immortal, knew Sean's mistress in ways that remained a mystery to him. Sean remained, watching, simply watching. Their joy was overwhelming. He noticed that she finished her swim, returning to the shore long before the others. She stood there, casting her eyes about the beach and rocky outcrops. Sean's heart leapt, but his feet were unable to move. When he stood, his knees almost buckled underneath him. She saw him and smiled. She strode towards him, carrying her sealskin in one hand. When she stood before him, she dropped the skin on the sand. Sean noticed that her other hand was curled into a fist. "For you," she said softly, extending her open palm to Sean. It was a rare pearl found only in the deepest parts of the ocean. "My name is Pearl, too." Sean slipped his fingers around the ivory oval, then laid it on his open palm, admiring it. When he did, Pearl noticed a scar crossing his palm. "How did this happen?" "I sailed the seas for many years on trading vessels, but the worst trip was to Ceylon. I was up in the crow's nest of a four-masted schooner when a sudden squall came upon us. I reached for the backstay and was jerked into the air. I slid down the line, landing on the poop deck, while the rope burned a gash into me end. 3 men lost their lives that day. I was lucky. But this scar reminds me how close I came to death." "I'm sorry," whispered Pearl. She brought his hand to her thin lips and gently kissed the scar. Sean found himself drowning in the deep sea-green eyes before him. This was love, and he knew it. They talked for hours, exchanging a lifetime of stories. Finally, Sean could stand it no longer. Then quickly, before changing his mind, he reached for her, pulling her close in a lover's embrace. She flew into his arms, welcoming him into her world. She did not even know his name, yet she knew him completely. He wrapped his tartan closely around them and leaned her back against the boulder. Her breath was sweet as their lips softly touched, Then she rested her head upon his shoulder, finding a haven. He caressed her hair, letting it playfully fall through his fingers. She swooned when he touched the nape of her neck, then arched in response. He kissed her now with a hunger that had to be satiated. She matched his hunger and wanted more. They knelt together in the sand, moving as one. They experienced a surrender that neither had ever known, giving and taking from each other in playful rhythms matched by the endless waves that now applauded. They cried out in ecstasy, rising together as the sun now flashed in the new morn. "You have to go now," Sean reminded her. He slowly pulled away, pointing to her sealskin. "One day, beloved, one day." Reluctantly, she picked up the skin and stood, placing it around her shoulders. The others were returning, and soon the beach was crowded with seals. Sean watched as she curled forward, reaching for the sand. She pulled the hood over her head, then dipped her head into the water. The transformation was once again complete. As before, she took one last look at him before diving into the water. This time, those luminous eyes seemed to smile. Sean would never be the same again. For the weeks to follow, Sean's paintbrush now dipped into more vivid colors, painting more sunrises than ever before. His heart seemed lighter, and he pursued the canvas like a lover. The villagers began to notice a change in him, especially Maggie. But soon the many cold nights on the beach took their toll, and Sean was struck with a dreadful fever. He awoke during the night, drenched in his sweat. The fever took on a life of its own, breaking during the late night hours, then rising again the next day. His body weakened, barely able to get food and water. His lips became dry and cracked. He was so ill that he missed his market day where he sold his paintings. His stall was next to Maggie's, and when he didn't arrive, she decided to pay him a visit. "Sean! Sean McBride!" she cried, knocking loudly. "Open the door! It's Maggie! I've come to check on you." Her knocking seemed hollow in the stillness. She glanced towards the beach, knowing he liked to paint there, but the beach was empty. Worried, she knocked again, even louder than before. "Sean! Sean, it's Maggie! Are you all right in there?" The door moved slightly beneath her pounding, and she walked inside. She found Sean lying on the floor, halfway between the bedroom and the bathroom. "Sean!" she cried, rushing to him. He spoke not a word as she helped him to the bed. She quickly made some tea and steamy broth, while Sean tossed back and forth, racked with restlessness. "Pearl!" The sharpness of the cry caused Maggie to drop the teacup. She quickly regained her wits and hurried into the bedroom with a tray. She coaxed Sean to be still long enough to drink the broth and tea, then he slumped into a deep slumber. While sleeping, he mentioned Pearl's name over and over again. Maggie sat by his bedside, listening intently. She thought she heard him say something about the moon and seals, but she wasn't quite sure. She noticed the large pearl on the nightstand, and thinking Sean might be worried about its safety, she placed it in the top bureau drawer, then quietly slipped out of the house. For the next week, Maggie came over every day, tending to Sean. Maggie often put cool cloths to his forehead, saying, "There now, Sean, Maggie will take care of you. Maggie will always take care of you." Her years of loving him might finally have a chance now at happiness. His fever seemed to be subsiding, yet it left him so weak he could barely stand. He still spoke in his sleep, calling out for Pearl. As the full moon lit up the sky that night, Sean slept, with Maggie keeping a careful watch. At one point, he cried out, "My pearl! Wait for me!" He released a heavy sigh, then moaned, "The moon! The seals!" Maggie went to the window, looking towards the beach. The cottage sat on a knoll, a perfect space for viewing the sands below. She blinked in disbelief when she saw the seals below on the beach. Then she held her breath as she watched their transformations. One seal, now a young woman, seemed to stay behind the others, anxiously searching the rocky areas. Maggie watched as this creature climbed atop a boulder, perched in stillness. A thin wail rose from the beach as the young woman began to sing. Irivata nahoroela, irivata nahoroela, irivata nahoroela, mahuris lanlak skachung chetu. Oh, my boatman nahoroela, oh, my boatman nahoroela, oh, my boatman nahoroela, my fondest wishes go with you. Oft I looked from the highest hill to see if I'd see my boatman. Will you come today or tomorrow? If you don't come, how sad am I? Irivata nahoroela, irivata nahoroela, irivata nahoroela, mahuris lanlat skachung chetu. Oh, my boatman nahoroela, oh, my boatman nahoroela, oh, my boatman nahoroela, my fondest wishes go with you. A tear rolled down Maggie's cheek as the mystery of Pearl revealed itself to her. She knew Sean was in love with this creature rather than her. Something in the bittersweet song awakened an old dragon in Maggie. Jealousy. She left the window, left the bedroom, and left Sean. Pearl waited all night for her lover, yet he never appeared. Thinking he had found another, she crept back into the ocean at sunrise, seeking comfort from the soothing waves as they rocked and cradled her. Then she was gone. That morning Sean awoke feeling stronger than he had in weeks. He moved slowly, but after a bit of breakfast he walked down to the beach. He saw the seal tracks leading towards the water and knew that he had missed Pearl. He sank down on his knees and wept. The weeks passed slowly. Sean barely remembered Maggie's care. He spoke to her at the market, but she seemed not to have time for him. During the afternoon of the next full moon, ominous clouds began skirting across the sky. They hung, then drifted, uncertain of their course. As nighttime fell, the moon stole glances through this cover to the water below, breaking into slivers upon the waves. A gentle rain began to fall as the seals approached the beach. Sean felt his heart almost leap from his chest when he saw the golden seal. He stayed by the boulder, waiting for her womanhood to free itself from its furry protector. As she loosened her hair, he ran to her, crying out, "Pearl, I'm here, Pearl!" Her eyes flew wide with joy as she turned, opening her arms to her beloved. The rain now pelted their bodies as arms and hearts entwined, encircling each other like a Celtic knot, without a beginning, without an ending. They danced around in circles in the playful surf, then fell into the water, laughing. Sean kissed Pearl with the fullness of his heart. Afterwards, she looked at him with questioning eyes. "Where were you? I missed you so much. I thought perhaps you'd left me and found another." "Never, Pearl, not ever again. The fever left me weak, and I couldn't come to you." "But what can we do?" Before Sean had time to answer, their pleasure was cut short by cries on the beach. "Get the skin! Just the gold one!" Sean turned to see Maggie and her two brothers, Ian and Gavin, racing towards the pile of sealskins. Maggie glared at Sean with a silent fury. "Quickly, you oafs!" Pearl left Sean's arms, sprinting through the waves. "Grab her, Ian!" Ian's stout shape was no match for Pearl, and he held her captive. Sean stood still, frozen and shocked at the scene before him. Finally, he shook off the hypnotic fear and headed towards Pearl. Gavin leafed through the sealskins like they were coats, then held up the golden one in victory. "Here it is, Maggie. McBride will never hurt you again." "Oh, cut it, you fool! Slash it to shreds!" "No!" cried Pearl and Sean together. It was too late. Gavin took his knife and plunged it into the forearm of the skin. Pearl screamed, then fainted, a thin red line now appearing on her arm as Ian held her. "Stop it! You'll kill her!" Sean yelled. By now the seal people, recognizing that one of their own was in trouble, quickly headed back towards shore. The first to arrive was a tall, dark-haired man, just as Sean punched Gavin in the jaw. Gavin wheeled around, the knife held fast in his grip while the golden skin fell. The seal man, directly behind Gavin, let out a moan as the knife made its way deep into his flesh. Ian rushed to Gavin's side, dropping Pearl. Sean scooped her up in his arms. The seal man crouched low, releasing his last breath, while humans and seal people alike now stood in a circle, silent at the horror before them. "Let's get out of here!" screamed Ian, grabbing Maggie in Gavin's arms. Gavin and Maggie, reeling from the shock of what had just happened, allowed themselves to be led away like cattle towards the slaughter. "Here, Pearl," taking a handkerchief and wrapping it around her arm, "I'll take care of you." "And we will take care of our own," said one of the seal women. "Come." The seal people put on their skins and edged the body of their brother into the water. Using their fins, they moved the body through the waves, 3 seals on each side. Soon they were gone. Now only Pearl and Sean remained. Without a word, Sean handed Pearl her golden skin, knowing that she must go. Tears of sorrow slid down her cheeks as she began to follow her destiny. Yet before pulling the skin over her head, she saw something lying forgotten on the sand. It was a pelt, the dark-haired man's sealskin. She picked it up and offered it to Sean. "This is yours. I believe that you were meant for the sea. It burns in your blood. Now we can be together, always." She pulled her hood over her golden hair and began her transformation. Sean held the sealskin in his hands, feeling the weight of his decision. He glanced towards his home place. His decision was clear. Farewell. He faced the sea, took a deep breath, then draped the skin across his shoulder. Nothing happened. He pulled the headpiece over his aging locks, yet felt his human limbs stronger than ever. He saw Pearl turn from the water's edge, nodding at him. She dipped her head into the water and finished her transformation. She waited for him now. He realized he'd forgotten to complete the ritual. He bent forward, hands on the sand with his feet stretched out behind him. He dipped his head into the water and felt the waves rush over him. The baptism of the sea renewed his spirit. His limbs began to change as the fur adapted to its new owner. His movements were clumsy, yet he edged closely beside the golden seal. She nudged him with her nose, then began to swim. The sable-brown seal followed her into the moonlight, into the sea, into love.